name is Fred N. Crowe, C-R-O-W-E. Born in 1950,
And where were you born?
Modesto, California.
And what were your parents' names?
Oh, my father's name was Fred. My mother's name was Olivia. The pastor who baptized me was Owen A. Troy. You know Elder Troy?
Yes, I do.
Now, between him and Elder J.E. Johnson, both of them doing the baptism, Elder Troy was interning, and Elder Johnson was the senior minister, and they conducted a tent meeting in Oakland, California. And it was that year that my mother and my sister and I were all baptized.
And what was the name of that church?
Well, it was just, the first name of our church was Market Street Seventh-day Adventist Church. But we had a meeting down on 7th and Peralta up in on a hall. It didn't have a name, it was just where we met. My wife just passed, you know.
I know, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes. And I have two sons, Ronald Crowe, you know him, and Robert Crowe, he lives here in Nashville.
Okay.
And those are the only two children I have. Well, I helped to organize the first conference. That was in Chicago in 1944. And that conference, of course, is known today as the Lake Region Conference. And the brethren elected me as the first treasurer of that conference. That was in 1944. The work has grown greatly since then, of course. And I don't know what you want me to say about the conference, except that it has excelled. It has grown from the smallest conference in the Lake Union to the largest. How I got started in ministry.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm a graduate of Atlantic Union College, and I graduated in 1939. And the regional conferences hadn't been organized then. Had no regional conferences. All conferences were white. And I was hired by the Indiana Conference and sent as an intern to Marion, Indiana, and all through the state of Indiana. I pastored the Marion Church, the Muncie Church, Elkhart Church, and the South Bend churches of the Indiana Conference. I worked in that conference for 5 years, and at the end of the 5th year, the Lake Region Conference was organized. Working with the Indiana,
Yes.
it was, the Lord blessed our work. Of course, there was no black leadership anywhere in the world at that time, before we organized regional conferences. I worked in the Indiana Conference, and the brethren were kind to me, but you could tell that there was a difference in the way they treated the black workers and the way they treated the white workers. I never will forget Elder S.E. White. He was president of the Indiana Conference. And the conference asked me to conduct a evangelistic meeting in Muncie, Indiana. So in those days, they didn't deliver evangelistic material to the field. You had to get a truck and go pick it up and bring it to the field and set up your own tent. Well, I went to Indiana and I put the tent onto my truck, chairs, and got ready to leave the area to come to Muncie. When the president of the conference came out to the truck and he whispered in my ears, he said, "Now, Brother Crowe, when you finish with this tent, just don't bring it back." I didn't know what he meant by that, don't bring it back. Well, when I got to the field, I soon find out why he said don't bring it back, because it was an old tent that had been used by white workers for years and years and years, and it was just in tatters. I was a week sewing that tent up. But we sewed the tent up, and we conducted a successful effort in Muncie, Indiana. It was a small church. We baptized about 19 people in that area. Now, there was another worker who came to Muncie and ran a tent up it also. He was a white worker. His name was Albert Tyson. Same conference. He ran his tent meeting on the other side of town. Now, Dunbar Henry was assisting me at the time, so we had a little extra time, and I said, Dunbar, let's go across town and see what kind of tent Albert Tyson has. It was a white worker, you know. Well, when I went over there, it was a brand new tent, beautiful tent, you know. So that was a difference they made in the workers. I just bring that to let you know that they made a difference in the workers. They gave me a tent that had been used years and years by other workers and had almost been thrown away. But this white worker, they have a brand new tent. We were both interns, but that was a difference they made between us, you see. Otherwise, I didn't complain about it because in those days, if black workers complained too much, they would drop from the work. So I didn't complain about it. We baptized our people, and we went on about our work as usual. But
So-
that was the way they treated black workers in those days, you see. When the Lake Region Conference was organized, I was elected as the treasurer of the conference, first treasurer of the conference. And of course, Lake Region was the first conference organized. And we were elected the first treasurer there, and I served in that conference for 16 years. And at the end of that time, I might say this, when I was elected as treasurer, I didn't want to be a treasurer. But I was the only one who had accounting experience, you see. Those days the black workers didn't go into accounting too much. But I took theology and accounting. And the brethren searched around, they couldn't find anybody to serve as an accountant. But I may go back a little further. The first treasurer that was elected to the Lake Region Conference was Charles Galley. Now, Charles Galley was teaching all business courses at Oakwood Junior College at the time. Very brilliant young man. And he was elected. We elected him. But he said, I can't come until June. Now, this was around November. So he couldn't come until June because the schools are here ended at that time. And Charles Galley was very brilliant in his line of work. He was the only one who knew accounting, shorthand, and typing, so he taught all that stuff at Oakwood, so they couldn't release him. So he said that he couldn't come. That's when they elected me as acting treasurer of the conference until he could come. Because I didn't want to come. I wanted to serve in the ministry. I didn't want to serve in the office. I wanted to be out in the field. So they convinced me to stay there, and I told Elder Dason, who was our first president, Elder J. Gershom Dason, I said, Elder Dason, now, when June comes, Galley's going to become the treasurer, and I'm going back pastoring. That's what I trained for, and that's what I wanted to be. Well, that was understood. Time came when Charles Galley changed his mind. He said, I feel obligated to stay here at Oakwood. I'm the only one qualified, so I can't leave the brethren. So you'll have to get another treasurer. So I was serving as treasurer, and I'll never even forget the day Elder Dason had a committee meeting, and Elder J.J. Nethery was the president of the Lake Union. And when we conducted our committee meetings, Elder Nethery, who was the president of Lake Union, attended every meeting. Wanted to see how we were going to do, because it was a fledgling young conference with no experience at all. He wanted to direct things. So he was sitting at the table and Elder Dason passed out the agenda. And on the agenda he had conference treasurer. So Elder Nethery said, what are we going to discuss about conference treasurer here? Elder Dason said, well, you know, Elder Crowe was only serving until June when Brother Galley was to come and take over as treasurer. But he's informed me that he has changed his mind now and he's going to stay at Oakwood. Now we will need to elect a treasurer. Well, Elder Nethery said, no, brethren, you've got a good treasurer here now. Keep him as treasurer here. That's how I became the treasurer, you see. And of course, when the union president spoke, that was it, those days. You see, new conference, and we were on trial. The president said when we organized that we wouldn't exist over 6 months, you know. The leaders had that understanding because they didn't feel that the black brethren had anybody with the ability to run a conference. Never had one run nowhere in the world. So they felt that we were going to fail and we would go back to them as we were before. But it didn't happen that way. They underestimated the intelligence of the black brethren, you see. So that's how I became the permanent treasurer then. Union president said he's a treasurer. Keep him right here doing a good job because I'd been sending reports to the union, you know, and so forth. That's how I became the treasurer of the conference. Well, after 16 years as treasurer of the Lake Region Conference, I went back into the ministry and we brought another treasurer in. I was invited to go to the Central States Conference where Elder Willie S. Lee was the president. Elder Willie S. Lee had been students together at Oakwood. We sang in the college quartet and so forth. So he said, would you like to get back in the ministry? I said, I surely would. Of course, treasury work is ministry also, but I wanted to pastor churches. So he invited me to come to the Central States Conference to pastor the church in Pueblo, California. Pueblo, Colorado. So I served there a few years and helped build up the work there. And Elder Crowder had become, no, Elder Willie Lee was the treasurer of the Central States Conference, yes. So after I conducted that effort in Pueblo, the conference committee moved me to Kansas City, Kansas, Bethel Church. I served there for a few years. While I was there, I received a call from Elder Dudley one night, late at night. Now, Elder Dudley knew me from South Bend. When I pastored South Bend, Elder Dudley was a young man about 12 years old, and I baptized him into the church in South Bend, Indiana. And Dunbar Henry and I encouraged him to go to Oakwood to become a minister, and he did. And I forgot all about Dudley, forgot all about him. Years passed by, so I was pastoring in Kansas City, enjoying my ministry there. Wonderful church, wonderful people. Lord blessed us with large number of precious souls as a result of my evangelism there, you see. So while I was there, I received a call late at night. And the call went like this: Brother Crowe? I said, yes, who's this? He said, this is Charles Dudley. I said, Charles Dudley, where are you and why are you calling me this time of night? He said, I'm president of the South Central Conference. I said, you are president of a conference? Yes, well, praise the Lord. Well, I'm so happy to hear about it. Well, Elder Crowe, my committee met the other day and voted to call you to become the pastor of the Riverside Church. I said, Elder Dudley, now you know how I feel about coming down south. I said I never worked down south because I didn't appreciate the, quality of care that they gave black people down there. But he said, things have changed down here now. And our committee feels that you would be the very one to fit into this position. I said, well, Charles, let me have a little time to think it over. I'd planned not to call back, because I love Bethel, beautiful church, And I said, I'll let you know in a few weeks. Well, I thought in a few weeks he'd get somebody else, 3 weeks, I got another call. Elder Crowe, I said, yes. Dudley, oh, Charles, what's up, man? He says, we're waiting for you to come down here to pastor this church. I said, you don't have anybody for that church yet? I said, well, Charles, I need a little more time. So I took 2 weeks more, and I thought, now sure, he's going to get somebody for that church. Call me again. We're still waiting for you in Riverside, in South Central. So I said, well, let me have a few days, and I'll let you know within 5 days. Well, I told my wife about it, and we prayed about it. She said, well, honey, evidently the Lord wants you to go to Riverside. If he keeps calling you this way, the Lord must want you to go. But honey, I don't want to go down south. But things have changed, she said, and the Lord wants you to come. Why don't you just accept the call? So I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to tell my church, because we loved each other. There was a love fest between Bethel Church, I didn't want to leave. So she said, well, tell the church, and whatever you think, we'll do it. So I told my church about it, man, they went up in smoke, Oh, you can't leave us. Please don't leave us. Is Elder Crowder pushing you out? Elder Crowder's a new president, I said, no, Elder Crowder doesn't have a thing to do with it. My wife and I have prayed about it, and we've decided to go. So the church was reconciled to it again. That's how I came to Riverside as pastor of this church. But when it was back up on the hill there. But I was the chaplain of the hospital also at that time, you see, the old Riverside Hospital, and pastor of the church at the same time. Dr. Dent was the medical director over there. Dr. Dixon, and there was another lady, Dorothy, I forget her name. She wasn't a member of the church, but she was a prominent doctor in the vicinity. Dr. Jones, was her name Jones? I forget her name now. I had to pastor the church in a regular way that a pastor does. At the hospital, I had to visit the patients and prayer. We had prayer with them and counsel them, gave Bible studies to some of the patients who were there. And that was the duties of a chaplain, mostly visiting, praying with the people, and helping them to take care of some of their business. I just did the regular work of a chaplain. I wasn't here when they opened Riverside. No. That was years before I came here, you see. Riverside had operated several years before I came here. And I knew several people who Norman Simons was the administrator. We had been students together at Oakwood College. And I forget who else was.
Friends?
Well, I was chaplain and pastor of the church, and James Meredith was the treasurer of the conference. But at that time, the Southeastern Conference was organized And it was a brand new conference. That was in the state of Florida. And they invited James Meredith to come down. Not James Meredith, but what's the treasurer of the church? Anyway, the treasurer of South Central was invited to become the treasurer of the Southeastern Conference. And he left and went down there, and I was invited to take his place here as treasurer of the South Central Conference. Being treasurer for 10 years.
10 years.
And I retired after 10 years. Age caught up with me. Elder Dudley was the chairman of the board. A lot of people had the idea that the South Central Conference owned Riverside, but that was not the case. The General Conference owned Riverside, and Elder Dudley he was the chairman of the board, and I was secretary of the board at the time. And we had several other lay members, I forgot their names, not really, who sat as members of the board. Of course, the General Conference had representation at all of our meetings, because that was their hospital. Well, the General Conference has done many wonderful things. But as far as I'm concerned, the most wonderful thing that the General Conference has ever done was to organize regional conferences, because it brought our people up to where they ought to be. We were second-class citizens in the church, because in 1944, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was the most segregated church in America. There was no integration whatsoever anywhere. We had 40 churches in the North American Division, black, 40 churches all together in the North American Division. And 9 of those churches were 9 conferences at the time. We did not have, we had 40 churches and 9 conferences in the North American Division. The 9 unions. Not one hired one black person anywhere. We had black preachers, but as far as office workers, departmental workers, officers, not one in any of them. And the work was, to make a long story short, after we organized regional conferences and we began to develop the church that was the most segregated church in America today is the most integrated church. But it all happened after we organized regional conferences. Now, Monty Solin, who was the director of statistics at the General Conference, wrote an article in the Review and Herald about black conferences. He said the evangelism in North America was dead until we organized black conferences. That's when evangelism took off, because the black brother knew how to evangelize. We've done what the Lord told the church to do. When the Lord left, he told the church to do one thing: go ye therefore and teach all nations, and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And if you do that, I will be with you always, even to the end of the world. That's what we were called to do. That has been my choice work. That has been my work that I enjoy more than anything else. And even as a treasurer, I had the experience of preaching in all the churches and even pastoring some churches while I was treasurer. And of course, winning precious souls to the Lord is the chief objective of every preacher and every worker, and should be. And that has been my greatest joy.